Yeah, shall I start? Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Oubab Msllam. I'm originally from Syria, but I live in Yerevan, Armenia. Basically, I graduated this year from the American University of Armenia with my second master's. This one was MA TEFL, Master's in Teaching English as a Foreign Language. And for today, I'm gonna discuss with you the my thesis, my master's thesis. So hope you enjoy it and hope you hear me till the end. So basically the title of the presentation or the thesis was Armenians English Teachers' Perceptions of what we call informal language learning of English. And this was actually under the supervision of my teacher, Mrs. Robenia Kasparian. So in this presentation, we're going to discuss the following points. We're going to talk a little bit about the introduction, the background that made me focus on this topic, the lit review that's been discussed, and also the purpose of the study, the research questions, the methodology, and the most interesting, if we want to say, the most interesting findings beside the delimitations and limitations. And I will end up with the recommendations concerning this topic. Now, to start with, actually, it was really interesting for me when we started researching about it, that we cannot deny that internet changed everything, including the language and the goal of learning it, starting from being a subject at school, and now it's a necessity for everyone, not only for everyone and in every field. And recently, electronic communication is now a reality for everybody, and basically the obvious question for an English educator is what is happening with the students and how their language is being developed with the use of all the new technological inventions. Concerning the lit review, we have the following points discussed. My goal was in the lit review was to see how OILE as a concept is related to different paradigms in linguistics. And here we have the 4 or 5 major points we can discuss. So the first one is actually the informal learning and the incidental acquisition in relation to OILE. So the term informal learning has been used to describe the informal situation where learners are exposed to and acquire language outside the class. Socket, who was actually the pioneer in OILE research, I would say he uses the term incidental acquisition to refer to the non-deliberate aspect of the learning process through which learners move from doing some leisure time activities to use these activities in their learning. So basically, online informal learning of English is positioned in the field of interactions, which are linked to the concept of incidental acquisition. Now, the other paradigm that has a relation to OILE, or OILE somehow is in connection with it, is actually OCCL, or what is referred to as out-of-class language learning. It has been used here to refer to the deliberate efforts of learners taking classroom-based language courses to find opportunities for language learning and use outside the class. And this is actually a part of it has some relation to the independent learning overall. Now, how OILE is related to this paradigm in linguistics is, OILE here is considered as informal, and it is also particularly online. It happens online. So these two features are actually the crossroad point between OILE and OCCL, mostly in ASL context. Now, OIL in particular, in terms of learning-oriented use of technology, is more incidental and naturalistic than OCLL. Now, the other point is actually a very famous one, by the way. It's the task-based approach. How is OIL related to this? OIL activities share the concentration on the concept of task, and OIL practitioners pay their attention to the meaning in interaction with the target language. That is actually the concept of task. And basically people involved in the process may be more language users than language learners. That's why this also one of the changes that we can mention in the field of OIL with the terms used for our students. Now the last, I suppose the last one is OIL plus CAL, or computer assisted language learning. OIL meets with CAL in that OIL learners are learning informally through different technologies and are open and familiar with the wide access to the multilingual and interdisciplinary nature of context. So basically this is actually also how OIL has this relation to CAL. The last one, I suppose, if I'm not mistaken, OER, or Open Educational Resources also, because OIL you can actually have a specific syllabus, let's say, for OIL. So everything is open, and that is actually where OIL has the relation with OER. In contrast to the non-pedagogical and informal nature of OIL, OER is also informal, but pedagogical and deliberate as well. Now, OIL practices are not developed for the sake of language learning only. OIL practitioners aim at using the language to communicate rather than to learn. So this is actually one of the main issues here we have to focus on. Now, what is OIL at the end of the day? You know, if we can have a specific definition for that. Socket in 2011, he suggested the following working definition. And let's guys read it together. And please, whenever you have any question throughout the presentation, let's leave it till the end so we can have like really interesting discussion at the end. Now, online informal learning of English has been described as a process driven by the intention to communicate. This is the focus. It's to communicate with language learning being only a byproduct of this communication. So we're going to come across actually several practices throughout the presentation of what OIL practices are and what do we mean by communication, not learning as much as that. So OIL include, there in the definition as well, Socket is mentioning here the online activities such as social networking, streaming, or downloading television series or films, emailing, blogging, chatting, twittering, participating in online forums, listening to music, and in general, Googling in English. So basically these are forms of communication rather than forms of learning or ways or practices of learning English. Now, basically the thesis was a replica of two other studies done by Toffoli and Socket. The first one actually was investigated by the two researchers attempt to determine the extent to which non-native students of English at the University of Strasbourg are actually in contact with English on a regular basis. What they have come up with, in brief, they had 60% of the students listen to English online more than once a week, with YouTube being their primary source. And I think actually this is not surprising that much. Only, by the way, 25% of them claim to read online at least once a week. Now, 75% of the students reported that most common type of listening materials was songs. Now, I think also this is one of the expected, if you want to say, and it was actually expected by the two researchers that time. Now, basically, they come up with more details about these practices, and they suggested that they found out that the most frequent setting for students to read online is social media like Facebook and MySpace. Instant messaging, emails, social media are the most commonly visited websites. The other study that I somehow based my thesis on was actually the other study by Toffoli and Socket in 2011. They surveyed a sample of 30 teachers at the University of Strasbourg to investigate their cognitions concerning OILE. And what they have found are the following points. The first one, the teacher participants believed that 40% of their students were involved in online activities in English. 21 out of the questioned teachers affirmed that they are aware of their students' online practices, which is actually a good percentage, I would say, a good number here. 22 of the teachers, they found that OILE is positive and is useful for students' listening comprehension. Now, 12 teachers found OILE effective for their students' speaking skills. 17 teachers found out that students' OILE practices affected their teaching, their own teaching practices in class as well. Now, from this point, I will go to my own study and start with the purpose of the study. The purpose was actually to investigate the reality of the phenomenon and the exposure of the Armenian students to English online. Basically, this being actually an issue there with their access to online, especially among teenagers. So also the other purpose was to investigate Armenian teachers' perceptions of and beliefs about their own students' practices, both as practices and as the influential areas of language learned by the students. Now, the main research questions were as following. The first one, how often do students use English online? This was actually mainly to the students, I suppose. What are the teachers' perceptions? And here actually we're gonna somehow split these three terms: perceptions, understanding, and practices with OILE. What are the perceived problems in applying OILE activities in class in general? So the methodology, it was actually an action research following a convenience sampling of both teachers and students. And I was lucky actually to find a very interesting program. It was an after-school English program in Yerevan. The participants were from three main cities in Armenia, the capital city Yerevan, and two other cities in the region. Students were mainly sampled in the study according to their presumed opportunity to search the internet on a regular basis, because that was a really nice, important criterion to consider, because it's not that much open, especially among teenagers, to access to internet. Teachers were already interested. Also, the teachers selected were already interested in the topic, so not all the teachers in the program were involved in this study. Now, to establish, if you want to say, a valid and a reliable set of results, research results, data triangulation was achieved, collecting information from different sources. We started with students' quantitative questionnaire and also teachers' questionnaire, and we followed up by teachers' interviews to provide more information and more comments, especially on the side of the teachers. Now, in order to analyze the data gained, we had two ways. The first one, the quantitative data was presented and analyzed in the interval and the numerical data from the two questionnaires were analyzed following descriptive statistics. However, the qualitative data that's been gained from the interviews with the teachers were converted into keywords and coded and then into themes. So these are actually the two ways mentioned here in the data analysis. Now we're coming to the results. And in relation to the first question, research question, how often do students use English online? We found out that concerning listening practices, 38%, which equals 60 out of 162 respondents, claimed that they listen to English once a week or more. 30%, which is almost 53 out of the 162, listen to English online 1 to 2 to 3 times a month, which is actually a good number since English is not that much a preferable language to learn as much as Russian, for example, German and French. Watching TV shows, movies, series, listening to music or songs on YouTube are the most frequently used materials by the students. Now, concerning their reading practices, we found out like almost combined, I would say, the half, they read once a week and they read 1 to 3 times a month, which is almost like 80 in total, 80 students or 80 respondents out of 163 respondents. Now, concerning the actual things they do, reading is, as a comment on that, reading for these students was considered as a part of interactive and communicative aspects of their language learning process. Now, concerning the writing interaction, especially on social media, almost a half, which is like 35% of the students, 70 of them, of the respondents, agree that using Facebook in general is improving their actual learning of English. Now, keeping with the writing interaction on social media, we had that 40% do not actually use social media applications to communicate in English with people they know. They mainly use Russian or Armenian, their native language. Now, concerning the second question, the second research question, which is the teacher's side right now, concerning their perceptions, understanding, and their practices. We found out that the perceptions of the teachers, they indicated their general awareness, and that's what we mean by perception. They indicated their general awareness of their students' online practices, and 57 of them reported that the number of the students is more than 20 students involved in OILE practices. Now, the teacher's understanding, which is how influential for them OILE is. 85% of them believe that listening comprehension is the mostly influenced area of language learning. And that actually is very similar to what was already found by Toffoli and Socket in their own study with the French teachers as well. Now, keeping with understanding the importance of OILE, teachers commended that students listen to songs, native language speakers, vloggers on YouTube, watch TED Talks, learn words they hear from songs or movies. And by that, students' ability to understand the tracks, and that was actually one of the comments from the teachers in her interview. So she said that she didn't have a problem when she played the tracks in class. because her students' ability or listening comprehension, their listening comprehension is getting higher and is getting improved as they don't have a problem getting the idea without any extra assistance from her side. Now, teachers' understanding of OILE, basically only 3 teachers reported that their students actually improved their reading skills after reading online. So 42% of them actually, they have found that influence on reading. Now, students' use of the informal expressions they learn from songs and movies in their writing assignments. This is actually the influence of OILE that the investigative teachers or the participant teachers found as the influence on their students' writing. So they found that they use more informal language. And it's understood because actually the resources that the students use are basically informal in nature. Students, they enrich their vocabulary through playing online games. And one of the specific features here to mention is the autocorrect features that we find in social networking apps or even text messaging. It helped students recognize the right form and spelling of the words. The teacher's understanding of OILE believes that students, 70% of them also believe that students' speaking skills is improved by their online practices. And this is actually in contrast, if you want to say, to what their students actually said, because their students reported that we don't have this opportunity to speak English to people we know on social media or online. But actually what is different here from the teacher's side is that students find the classroom as the actual context where they improve their speaking through English. So it's the problem not with acquiring or not with the somehow exposure to the language as much as it's actually with the opportunity and the context that fosters this kind of opportunity to interact through the language. So they change some of the features that the teachers reported that as an influence on their speaking. They mentioned that the students, they change their intonation. They try to produce words like a native speaker. They enrich their vocabulary or somehow use actually some inappropriate or vernacular expressions. Now, concerning the practices, what they've got, okay, and how they use that. So teachers so far are aware of their students' practices. They are at some point of awareness also of the importance of their students' practices. Now, what are their practices, their actual teaching practices? Statistically, all the teachers reported that their students' OILE activities affect their teaching practices in general, in varied degrees. So they believe that in making their lessons as relatable as possible to their students' language learning needs through watching and discussing favorite topics and TV shows, movies, or using students' favorite games. Basically, the major findings with the problems that the teachers have faced are as following here. These are a brief of that. The large number of these activities are illegal. Most of the language they encounter is not that much good. And of course, actually, they can't use that in their own classes because due to the limitation in terms of facilities. Now, concerning the perceived problems as well, students become too sensitive to share their own social media or even private time activities. Not all students, as I mentioned from the beginning, not all students have access to internet, and some of them even have low-tech gadgets, so it's not that much appropriate to use. Parents sometimes complain that their children are just using their phones. They're not actually learning something. Now, concerning the limitations and delimitations, starting with the delimitations, The selection of teachers depended on their initial interest and their accessibility, their availability as well. The same is actually for students were reached who was easily available and reachable. Now, one limitation here, starting with the limitations, one limitation was the number of the participants. We did not have the opportunity to involve all the students and teachers in the program. The students' questionnaire focused mainly on the collecting more answers on the frequency, related to the frequency of their practices rather than on the actual activities. The teacher questionnaire and interviews did not provide that much data concerning the behavioral effects of OILE on the student practices, how their behavior as students changed in class. So we didn't have that much information about it. To conclude, so we got with some recommendations. The first one is more training that should be done to enable teachers to use such activities and practices in class. And the other one, teachers in the program in general can follow their students' preferences to make their online activities more pedagogically productive and effective. Also, teachers in the program should be careful when using their students' informal language learning. As also suggested by several researchers, one of them is Msllam in 2017, teachers can use their students' OILE practices in distance learning, for example, not only in their own classroom, as actually a part of students' homework. So also teachers were recommended to start using blogs or forums to make their writing tasks as interactive and appealing to the students as possible. Some other recommendations for further, if you want to say, research. Firstly, research should also involve different age groups and bigger sample size of teachers and students. The research approaches such as diary studies also could be useful to provide more qualitative data to any further research. Now, here are a list of the resources being used, and I want to say at the end, thank you so much. At least we have a couple of minutes left to discuss any questions or comments you might have.